Welcome to our June committee meeting. Notice and time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating the OPPD website, and by mailing such notice to each of the district directors on June 6th, 2017. We will get started. Looks like we got a full house. That's good. Start out with the finance report. Director Hurley, you want to lead us through that?
Yeah, we have a finance report, and I believe we're going to start with the monthly inventory. You going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
we'll
be glad to. Okay, so we'll start with the monthly financial report. The month of May was a very solid financial performance, as you're going to see. So if you flip to the slides, we'll start with revenue. First category is retail revenue. And what you're going to see is for the month and for the year-to-date, we're very, very close to budget. So retail revenue for the month of May was $71.6 million, which is $1 million over budget. Year-to-date revenues, retail revenues are $340.1 million, which is $0.8 million under budget. Second category revenue is off-system sales. So off-system sales for the month of May was $10.7 million, which was $2.4 million over budget. And year-to-date, off-system sales, $58.2 million, which is $13.8 million over budget. Now, we're exceeding budget for a couple of different reasons. One is we've had additional wind production that was not included in the budget in these first 5 months. The other factor is our fossil units are performing very well, and their availability in the market has been improved by some operational changes that we've made.
Yeah, so I would add that a couple things to that. We came back early from Nebraska City 2's outage a couple days, so that was a good bonus, I guess, to be in the market. As Tammy mentioned as well, we've opened up the range at which the units can operate both at the top end, and then they're able to back off to lower loads when the market conditions aren't as good, aren't as favorable. So they can stay online rather than shut down and restart, which is additional cost, right? And be ready in the market. So
is that because we have the gas starters? Is that why, or that we didn't load down or not? What, you made some actually changes in the
we did
system?
some testing and have made some changes with the equipment, mainly with the operational procedures to allow us to go to lower loads with the coal units.
That's great.
Sometimes we'll add gas to provide stability at those lower loads.
This is a great example of one of the elements of our cost and process improvement initiative. And part of it was to optimize a variety of our operations, whether it's scheduling on the T&D side or whether it's lowering the minimum that we would be able to bid into the market certain levels, because it is costly to bring a plant back up. It takes long. There's more emissions in doing that, and so the team has done a great job. They really worked on it on Nebraska City 1 and the Nebraska City stations, and then moved it to North Omaha stations where they have the capability to do the same thing.
So this is a long-term opportunity you can keep doing.
Yes.
Yep, that's good news. Wow.
Yep.
Good for you.
You mentioned generally two reasons why we're over budget in off systems. Do you have a sense of the 13.8 million, how much is made up from the additional wind versus how much is that at 64?
I would say it's, go ahead. You would answer. Oh,
Right.
okay. It's probably about 2/3 wind.
Okay. Thank you.
It's been windy. We've been lucky so far that it's windy. and
That
hot.
was really the Grand Prairie that we really had budgeted for, I think, July of 17,
July is when we had it.
that we began to take the energy in January.
Right. Okay, the next graph is a new one. If you remember last month, we have a graph on the end that we've been showing you that's the other smaller expenses and incomes, and we were netting those. And so we've separated those into two graphs. So this is the additional small components of other income. So this category includes other electric revenue, investment income, allowance for funds used during construction, and then products and services. And for the month, you can see that the income from that is $6 million, which was $2.2 million over budget. And year-to-date, this category is $26.4 million, which is $7.5 million over budget. The most of this increase, the $7.5 million, is the recording, part of it is the recording of the decommissioning interest income is a little bit different this year. Okay, so when you turn to the expense side, O&M expenses less fuel and purchase power. For the month of May, that category is $27.8 million, which is $1.3 million under budget. And we have a few, there's probably about $1.5 million of expenses, O&M expenses coming through from the NC2 outage that you'll see next month. And then the year-to-date, this category is $130.6 million, which is $7.4 million under budget. Fuel and purchase power category, for the month of May, those expenses were $15.9 million, which was $4.7 million under budget. You can see we've been slightly above budget until this month. And what this is we've recorded a receivable for $7.7 million in tax rebate, and that's connected to the Prairie Breeze wind agreement, and that's for the Nebraska tax advantage. And then year-to-date.
Hey, Tammy, really quick, so part of the, just to set some context, so part of the contracts that we have on our, specifically on the Grand Prairie project, or Prairie Breeze project, is that if there are tax advantages that come through, then the developer and OPPD will split those. And so it's the agreement that the teams have put together to take advantage of that. That maybe weren't originally in the bidding process, but we get the opportunity to get that benefit as we move forward. So that's been a contractual arrangement that we've had in place.
Good arrangement.
Yeah, we
Is
like
that arrangement on all of these purchases?
I believe it is a template
I
that
think so.
we.
I mean, every single one.
Anyway, it's the sales tax.
That's always our
Newer
intention to
Yeah,
get that.
it's the sales tax exemption they get, which every manufacturer in the state gets, by the way, except the wind developers. But that was put in the legislature, and then that's split, so it's a win-win for us.
Yep.
You know, no other manufacturer pays that except these people.
So
That's good to know we got that.
Yeah, and that credit will flow in through the FPPA process.
Oh, good. So that goes through the FPPA. Good.
Yes, yes. Okay, so year-to-date, fuel and purchase power is $112 million, which is $3.4 million over budget. Next graph is the other expense category, and this is depreciation, amortization, decommissioning, payment in lieu of taxes, interest expense, and then the special item. So these expenses for May were $29.7 million, which was $3.4 million under budget. And year-to-date, this category is $165.2 million, which is $2.5 million over budget. The next.
And then I want to add that decommissioning is under budget right now. So as far as
Yes,
our
it is.
budget, is that correct, Mary?
Yes.
Yes, we're forecasting to be under budget. What we did at the end of last year was we spread our expenses over 12 months. So some of the savings that we're seeing are coming in monthly, but we are forecasting at the end of the year it will be significantly under budget.
Good news.
Okay, so you pull all those together, net income for the month of May is $14.9 million, which is $15 million over budget. And year-to-date, the net income is $16.9, which is $22.1 million over budget. And then just a reminder that the year-to-date budgeted net income is $66.5 million. Let's turn to cash items. First one is capital expenditures for the month of May. It was $5.3 million, which is $7.5 million under budget. Again, in this category, we have some NC2 work that the accounting will clear next month. And then year-to-date capital expenditures have been $32.8 million, and that's $29.2 million over budget, or under budget, sorry. Cash balances, the unrestricted cash balance at the end of May was $348.4 million, which is $45.1 million over budget. And the cash balance excludes $22.2 million that's restricted, that's the NC2 participant fund.
And then NC2, the outage, do we expect that to be under budget also?
That will be under budget, yep,
Great.
both in O&M and capital.
Hey, Tammy, I had a quick question. And I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have a follow-up? On the capital expenditures, it looks like it's way 47.1% under budget. What kind of explains that? Is it a timing deal, or
Yeah.
things didn't happen that you didn't have to buy things that you
I
planned
think it's a
on?
combination. So some of it is timing. Some of the work we will be doing on the transmission system was in the budget a little bit earlier, so that'll be a little bit later in the summer and towards the end of the year. And then some of it really is, I think, our new process around prioritizing and looking at options under capital builds and the prioritization and scrubbing of those to get the best deals. So some of it is your procurement coming in. The supply chain processes are improving procurement of goods to use for capital, so.
Okay.
Any other questions? That concludes the financial report.
Thank you, Tammy. The next thing we have is discussion of Strategic Directive 15, and we met Monday and had a long discussion and a learning session, as Scott's going to bring us up to date on that again.
Great, thank you, Director Hurley. Good morning. SD 15 is on enterprise risk management, and the policy language is in front of you here. The board approved SD 15 on July 16th of 2015 and accepted the Finance Committee recommendation to find OPPD sufficiently in compliance with the directive in June of 2016. A couple of things to point out when we talk about a risk management program. I think it's important to note that our program is modeled after the ISO 31000 standard and the principles therein. There is no certification for the ISO 31000 available at this Dan Laskowski, who's over here, and you want to raise your hand? Thank you. Stand up. That's good. He's our enterprise. He manages the day-to-day of the ERM and has done an incredible job. He has his associate in risk management designation and is studying for the ARM-E. The program does provide independent oversight of risk management activity, really in, I think, a great and very engaging way. We have cross-functional teams across the organization and across 3 committees. You'll see those shortly. But each of these cross-functional teams, which is really at the division manager, director level, are able to hear, assess, and kind of challenge and make sure that the risk is being assessed appropriately. It also assures that the ownership for the scoring is not really done by the person that owns the risk, but rather by a group of individuals across business units. And I know that at one point Mary Fisher has led one of those committees, and we have division managers and directors that are leading those committees moving forward. Also feeding this program is a significant amount of information from outside in terms of talking with experts from Brattle to Navigant to McKinsey. We collect a great deal of outside information on a regular and ongoing basis, and this influences our conversation significantly about risks and the dynamics of the environment that might impact the level of risk. One of the first tenets of the principle is to ensure the district is maintaining this program, and we have a policy guide as well as a significant, a detailed handbook of roles and responsibilities. We also incorporate these accountabilities into our key accountabilities as an organization. We'll talk a little bit more in a second about the alignment of committees. We've tried to align the committees with corporate governance, and so we have committees. You'll see that in a moment. And then risk identification and oversight. On a monthly basis, these committees I talked about they meet and they discuss risks, they discuss what's happening and what might be impacting those risks. They assess risks and make sure that each risk is reviewed on at least an annual basis, more frequently if the risk or the things that are happening in the external environment would warrant that review. On a quarterly basis, the more significant risks are reviewed at the senior management team level, really seeking to understand, did we identify all enterprise risks, or the ones at least that we can be aware of? Significant enterprise risks are understood, and are the mitigation strategies understood, appropriate, and sufficient? There's two levels. One is orange, which you'll see, we'll talk a little bit more this afternoon, and one is red. We then bring the red risks to you on a quarterly basis. These are identified or scored as the most significant, and we wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to A, have visibility on them, and B, really hear and understand a bit more about our mitigation. We'll be going into closed session today to talk about those, given the sensitive information in the mitigation, and also to allow them 3 questions around the mitigations. This is the way it's structured. I mentioned the working committees. We have a governance and public information risk committee, finance, insurance, and audit, and system management, which also includes aspects of risk related. These committees are chaired by Tim O'Brien, who you I think all know from economic development, John Thurber from finance, and Tim McAreeby, supply chain management and finance. Dan is the risk manager, and I am the senior director. Reports up into the Executive Enterprise Risk Management Committee, which is a senior management team. Our goal is to have this aligned. What we really would like to do over the next year is figure out, and I will begin today, I think, in our quarterly conversation, how do we begin to have even more conversation? What is the right level of conversation that the board would like to have? How do we balance that? How can we evolve that to make it even more effective? This small chart that you see in front of you will be much bigger as we go into it this afternoon, but I wanted to highlight it. This is the matrix upon which we actually judge all risks. Senior management approved that in October 2016. The matrix provides an understanding of risk severity as well as consequences across 6 categories. It takes a look at potential risk from safety, financial, reliability, regulatory, reputation, and technology. And it looks at really four levels of risk and potential impact. It also looks at the likelihood, and is this likely to happen, to the degree that it's likely to happen. What happens is as the committee brings these risks forward and has scoring and assessment conversations, they end up in being in one of these boxes here. And the orange boxes here are ones, and the red go to senior management, and the red come to the board as well. One of the changes we made in October actually was this box here, which is a 2 in terms of likelihood, which means it has happened in the industry. Potential to occur at OPPD is like judged at between around 1 and 10%. But the risk level is high, and in the past that would have been orange, and we changed it to red because we felt that it was an opportunity to provide you additional insight into some of those risks in light of the changing environment. On a quarterly basis, so now you understand how we assess the significance, I think. On a quarterly basis is the other part of this statement, and here are the meetings, and after our meeting today and prior to board when you'll approve the recommendation from the Finance Committee, you, in terms of sufficiently compliant, we will have had this discussion. Another component of the SD is when necessary, request additional explanation of the risk from the corresponding senior manager responsible for the risk, or request additional expertise to supplement the review. If at any time we're going through these risks and you have questions or questions about risks generally, you can come to a senior manager, myself or any of the senior manager owners, and we'll make sure that we are able to provide you the kind of information that you're seeking or requesting. And you can do that really at any time. Review additional ERM information related risk activities and strategies on an as-needed basis. One of the things I wanted to highlight, it speaks directly to this point in its way is during the past couple of years, and Tammy alluded to it earlier in terms of the capital discussion and capital prioritization, is we've spent a significant amount of time taking what has been a long-standing enterprise risk management system and figuring out the best ways to integrate it into the decisions we're making, whether it be a capital decision or a regular business decision. So one of the things that guides our decisions and recommendations to senior management and to you is a business decision model template. That includes a space for risk and requires that people actually identify risks associated with the decision and the potential impact that could have, and how are they mitigating the nature of those risks. The other thing that we have in terms of the capital management process is we've incorporated enterprise risk into the template that people are required to complete. So we begin to understand, is what they're asking for actually mitigating some kind of a risk or creating any kind of risk issues around which we want to be aware. We also now leverage this conversation really in our strategic planning and our business unit planning. Most recently, we had an off-site conversation around strategy plan, and as we were going through our strategic initiatives, we were looking and asking and identifying what are the risks or issues that could impact our ability to execute. And so as we gather those, we can then feed them into the process if they're not already in the process, or validate that they're in the process and therefore they're already being identified and managed. We have a business unit planning process that's coming up as well, and it does ask the senior managers as they're working with their leadership teams to identify, understand, and bring risks back into the ERM as they identify them through those conversations. In terms of what things that you might see, and you might not know that risk was kind of in part of it or included in it, but there's some recent decisions in terms of resolution number 6179, for example, the SD11 Economic Development Monitoring Report and Facebook project. There are risk considerations that go into our economic development. What is the impact of this particular candidate in terms of Facebook, in terms of overall portfolio? Does it create any risks for us? How are we managing through that? Retirement plan changes as well in terms of the overall funding and making sure that we're minimizing risk to our overall portfolio. Or the corporate operating plan, where we're taking a look in consideration of expected market prices for the coming year, impacts of budget, how and what might stand in our way of getting to 20% below regional average. So we have reviewed this with the Finance Audit Insurance Committee and recommend that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with SE 15. Are there any questions about ERM or what we're doing or anything that we've just presented?
I just think I appreciate the amount of work that you've done to continually look at this and improve it. And I think the idea of that you have anything that's the risk likelihood of anything happened in the industry before, to put that to a red. I think that's a great idea. And also that you're incorporating anytime you have any type of strategic planning or any type of budgeting or anything like that, or any plans, you always look at the risk, and that's throughout the company. I think that's great.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm impressed with the way that you've sort of threaded this into other decision-making processes to ensure that it's part of the equation. I do have a question, and I hope it's not too philosophical, and if it's for later, then push me then. But oftentimes, the equation is really about risk-reward trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just interested in sort of how we're balancing that. And this is a very unique industry, so the risks may not have rewards in some cases.
Right.
But can you just kind of talk about that dynamic and how it plays out in this process?
I can talk to how I see it, but I'd also turn it back to folks at the table to talk about how they see it and how they've incorporated it. In terms of like the business decision model template, going to the very tactical aspects
Sure.
of filling that out, the risk, of course, is not the only consideration. So as you're going through risks, that's one consideration. But as you walk through the rest of the considerations, what are the criteria for making the decision? What's the relative weighting? You can actually effectively, I think, get to that value trade-off between risk in terms of overall reward. One of the decision templates that I thought was particularly good and something that drove very meaningful conversation in the organization was really centered around overall discussion around Port Calhoun and decommissioning and understanding the risks there, but then also understanding what is the benefit to the district through the
Sure.
process. So it allowed for a technicolor discussion,
Yeah.
is what I would say.
But I would even say even our capital projects and our capital project process, as you go through that decision-making and prioritization, we look at just the benefit, whether it's a return on that. The sooner I can do this project, the more revenue, the lower the cost, whatever that may look like. There's a financial benefit, maybe an organizational benefit, maybe a human employee benefit. As you've seen signs around the building around organizational health, right? So it could be a number of those things that we identify as a positive value, as well as a risk of not doing it or a risk of doing it, whatever the item may be. So we really have tried to incorporate that in the broader decision-making process, and that is kind of extended into capital and O&M project work that we do as well.
And it's interesting, we do this with our customer only service too. As, you know, when you're talking about, when to have people, you know, shut off people or not, you know, the idea of not shutting them off in the winter and extending that, you know, beyond that, we're obviously, you know, that's a little bit of a risk for us, but it's more value for our customers to do that.
I have a comment, and I just wanted to thank you. I didn't know where the ERM came from, and so when I was looking around, I do appreciate your anchoring back to the ISO 31000. That was good news for me. I also, your new addition of the 0 to 10% likelihood, or it's happened elsewhere, I think that's important. We are wired to think in a straight line of change, you know, a constant rate of change, and that I think will help us respond to exponential changes. So, very good.
Thank you. I think what's been interesting is we've gone back and reassessed all risks in the ERM with the new category. We have noticed that some of the risks actually became less significant and some of them became more by having this kind of a perspective. It also shifted it more from just financial to these other aspects, so it created, I think, more the dynamic you're talking about. Good. Any other questions? So, in terms of revisions, having gone through it and just holding it up to other policies, we had some very minor that we were recommending. It was replacing semicolons with periods, and it was changing this more significantly, senior managers. Mary Fisher and I, for example, are both senior directors. We both own risk. We both sit on the senior management team. This said vice president before, so it was important to change the wording so that we could be appropriately included in the spirit of the policy. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Good work.
Thank you. Got anything else?
We have systems and,
We have an appointment of an investment manager
Investment managers.
oh, yeah.
is another item on here for the retirement plan.
Yep, would you like me to walk through that?
Sure.
Okay, so this will be an action item this afternoon. This is appointment of a new investment manager in a new class in the OPPD retirement plan. So in October of last year, the board approved 4 new classes to be added for investments in the fund. In November, we started, there's an internal team, a trust selection committee that is responsible for review and recommendations of investment managers. We use Siegel Marco Advisors as an external investment advisor. And they established a plan to review and recommend these new managers. In March, this board approved 3 new managers in small cap space. One was in value, one was in growth, and one was international small cap. This is the 4th piece of this. So in April, we started the search with Siegel Marco's assistance, and this space is in the private real estate category. Trust Selection Committee reviewed 4 of the leading candidates. We interviewed 3 of those candidates, and included in those interviews was Harrison Street Real Estate Capital, which is located in Chicago, Illinois, and PGIM Real Estate, which is located in Madison, New Jersey. Both of those those two candidates met the policy considerations that the board has established and have performance over the 5-year period that's very competitive. So the Trust Selection Committee is recommending that we hire Harrison Street Real Estate Capital and PGIM Real Estate as investment managers in the retirement plan. You have an attachment that shows their 5-year performance and an attachment from a letter from Siegel Marcos talking about the selection process and concurring with the recommendation of the committee.
And this is gonna be about 5% of the plan is gonna be real
Yes.
estate? And
Yes.
2.5% for each of these,
Yes,
is that correct?
yes, that's true, that's true.
Okay. And then can you sort of tell me about the difference in the two holdings?
Sure. So the private real estate category, what we were looking for was core real estate investments. And when we started doing the interviews, PGIM is the traditional core investment, and that, and I should say they're a company of Prudential Financial. They invest in office space, Class A apartments, some in retail, and they go into destination type facilities, and then self-storage. So that's kind of the normal core for these real estate. What we found was Harrison Street is also core, but they had kind of a different philosophy, and we thought it was a very nice complement to the standard core. And what they invest in is senior housing, medical facilities, and most of those are attached to hospitals, student housing, so developing apartment complexes either on campuses of large universities or very close to those universities, and then they have self-storage as well. Kind of diversifying that core just a little bit.
And then what are the costs for these, as far as for us to wonder?
The fees?
The fees.
The fees, Laura, do you have that? So this is Laura Langford. She's the manager in Treasury.
So the fees for Harrison Street, those are 115 basis points up to 25 million, which is what our investment will be. And then PGIM is 100 basis points, also up to that 25 million, and that's a pretty consistent fee for that private real estate class.
And then when you looked over the risk with our new risk management program,
Right.
what type of risk do we have with that?
You know, the major risk that you would see in real estate is they're less liquid. So if for some reason you would need cash out of this fund, now we have a cash account in the retirement fund that handles all of the payments, so there isn't a cash ready issue. But if you would need cash, there's a queue to get out. And the reason is most of the investments are stocks and bonds. You can go and you can sell those immediately, same day. These are physical assets, so it takes some time for these companies to liquidate if they would have to. So it's mostly liquidity would be the major risk in this area. What we feel is these two invest in very solid properties, and so we don't see a risk of risky investments there. Yeah. And the return is, the returns on these, the 5-year on Harrison Street is 10.6%, and PGIM is over 12, so they're nice returns.
These are all domestic holdings
Yes, these are all domestic.
and geographically throughout
And-
the country?
And
Pretty dispersed.
these two funds are geographically diversified across the country. Some of the funds are not,
Okay.
are regional, so.
And when you talk about timing, you're not talking about a month or two, you're talking about a day or two, is that correct as far as?
No, liquidity out of these
Liquidity.
would be in a queue to get out, and yeah, it could be over a couple month
It
period.
could be over a couple months period.
Again, I think the risk assessment that we did is that we're really not concerned, these are meant to be long-term investments anyway.
Right.
And so the requirement of liquidity is really less of a risk in this, because we already have other funds that provide that liquidity in the event that we needed to.
Tam, can you say who's on the trust selection committee?
Who's on the trust
Yeah,
selection
or who makes it up? I don't need to know the individual.
So, Mart sets the the Vice President of HR, the CFO, who else is in there? John's on there. John Thurber.
Nyla Court.
And who else? Oh, Jim Carney, the controller.
Manager benefits, is Nyla on there as well? As non-voting member, right?
Yeah.
And we also have labor on the committee too, correct?
Not as a
No?
voting member. They attend the
They
review
attend.
meetings, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how do you let the employees know this? I mean, it's a public meeting today and
Right.
other things. It's like anything, you pay attention.
Yeah, so there's always a communications plan that we go through corporate communications, any changes in the investment plans.
The only reason I say that is because this is a public meeting. By the way, we're streaming live again, but,
Yeah.
you know, these are our own employees making these decisions. They're guided, and they also decide with, is it Marcos or whoever we're using as our, so I just, again, throw it out there, because I think last time we did one of the ratepayers was questioning how it's done and this and that, but, I mean, there's a lot of due diligence done on our part for their own or employees, basically, so just get that out there. And some people just think, oh, they're told what to do and they do it, but I know that's not the case. It's a lot of effort to do this.
Yeah.
So appreciate the committee doing it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or
Returns.
Rich, that's it?
Let's hope to continue to see them, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So that completes the Finance Committee report.
Chairman Gay, you asked me to introduce a couple new faces around the room. So on my left and maybe to the right of the audience, where Kate Brown would normally sit, would be Joshua Mock. Joshua is relatively new to OPPD. He's our new Director of Security and Information Protection. And so he's sitting in for Kate. Both Kate and Mart are at a utility executive conference over the next several weeks. And so Joshua's been a great sub for Mart over the last week or so, got him involved pretty quickly, sat in our strategic planning session that we had last week as well. On my right here, maybe to the audience left, would be Jerry Rainey. Obviously, both of these gentlemen look completely different than Kate and Mark. Jerry Rainey is our manager of our HR business partners and has been with the company how long? 8 years. 8 years. So started at Fort Calhoun, really focused on some of the Fort Calhoun nuclear recruiting and work around that, and has moved into the manager position here. So appreciate Jerry and Joshua stepping in and being part of the senior team this week as well. So.
All right, thanks, Tim. All right, we'll move on. Nuclear Oversight Committee, Ann.
Yes, we had a nuclear oversight committee meeting. I'm trying to get out of here. On Tuesday, and I will have Mary give the sort of a rundown of what we discussed, and then we'll have John give his report.
Good morning. Thank you, Director McGuire. I want to emphasize as I go through this report that we are continuing to maintain the spent fuel cooling, which is the key for Fort Calhoun these days. We do preventative maintenance as well as surveillance tests on the major systems that support that. So that's an important thing to just kind of keep in front of everybody. We do that routinely day after day and have had no issues thus far. We are also continuing to remove asbestos from room 81, and when I say remove asbestos, it's a bit more complicated than that. We have been removing some of the platforms and piping that are in the way of us getting into that asbestos, so we're actually removing some of the structures that you would see in that room. And so I walked through there yesterday. It was eye-opening what they had done in the last month, so continue work there. We have contracted, as we will talk about later this morning, to start our fuel characterization project, and so I'll get into that a bit later when we report on the contracts over $500,000. But that is going well also. We had requested in late last fall that the emergency plan for Fort Calhoun be reduced, and that submittal has been into the commission. now for 6 months. We anticipate approval of that sometime later this year, before year end, hopefully. To ensure the NRC that we can meet the requirements of that, we continue to do drills and training because we're doing it with a reduced staff. So we want to make sure that we continue to keep all the qualifications necessary and the people trained to respond should there be an emergency. So I wanted to report that we had done that successfully over the last month, and we will continue to do that over the summer. We will have a graded exercise by the NRC in October of this year, so we continue to prepare for that. We also hosted a number of individuals from the Department of Energy. As we announced our decommissioning, Department of Energy took notice of that. They routinely go out to nuclear power plants that have decided to decommission, and they hired Pacific Northwest Laboratories to come in and to assess those sites so that DOE understands what our plans are for our spent fuel in the interim until DOE can take that fuel. And so they came in and reviewed what our current plans are. They also reviewed the transportation requirements for DOE to take our fuel in the long term. So they were in, and they will put out a report later this year that will now include Fort Calhoun. So this is something that's routinely done at all the nuclear power plants that are decommissioning. We had the NRC in. There were two inspectors that came in, excuse me, one inspector that came in to review where we are with our independent spent fuel storage installation. Again, it's a routine inspection. So I want to just let everyone know that we continue to have routine inspections from our Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The inspector said that he noticed a drastic improvement in our ISFAC program, so we're making sure that we're paying attention to that and doing all of the things we need to maintain that installation in top form. We did have, the NRC had a public meeting at the end of May, and that public meeting is part of the requirement for our post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. And the meeting went very well. We had about 15 to 20 members of the public. I think they asked about 6-7 questions, all of which the NRC was ready, willing, and able to respond to. So I think the meeting went very well. We also had a number of the directors that showed up, so I thank you for your support. Tim Burke and myself went to Washington, D.C. on May 23rd. We had a drop-in visit with Commissioner Barron. This is one of the items that our Decommissioning Oversight Committee has informed us that they thought would be good practice. So we went and met with Commissioner Barron. He was the only one that was available on that date. We will try to get to the other commissioners as time permits. We had a great meeting with Commissioner Barron. He was very interested in what we were doing at Fort Calhoun and how we were progressing with our decommissioning. We also met with Mark DePaul, and Mark is the director of the Office of Nuclear Material and Safety and Safeguards, or NMSS. We will be converting from NRR over to NMSS as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission body that overlooks decommissioning power plants. We anticipate that to be sometime next spring. So in the April to May timeframe, we will be converting over. So it was a good time for us to meet with him, explain what our decommissioning activities are thus far, and what our plans are going forward. Last but not least, I will just report out, I know this is one of the items that I've been asked to routinely report on. Our employee numbers as of June 8th were 413 at the facility. In 2016 and through June of 2017, we have had 103 resignations, 36 retirements, 46 terminations, and 45 personnel that have transferred from Fort Calhoun into OPPD for a total of 230 employees. So that is my report.
Okay, thanks. I want to add that it's good that we have Mark DePaul. Mark DePaul he knows the plant real well because he was the region director for Region 4. And has been up to the plants many, many times. So I think that's a plus for us that he has somebody who's feeling.
Yeah, actually, excuse me, I have a hard time keeping up on these acronyms. And your second to your last thing, you said you switched from something to something.
Yep.
What if you could elaborate on that just a little bit?
Sure. So we are currently under the reactor program, the operating reactor program of the NRC.
That's
in
called
terms
what?
of their review of our proposals for decommissioning, in terms of our inspections, in terms of, I'm sorry, not our inspections, but in terms of the submittals that we're putting in to move into decommissioning. And so as we get those approved, all of the submittals as well as the inspections move over to what they consider more the decommissioning branch of the NRC. So we'll be moving more from an online to a decommissioning branch of the NRC.
So we're currently under the NRR today.
Correct.
Right, and that's a nuclear regulatory
Reactor
reactor.
Where are
And
we
then
going?
we're moving
to
to,
NMSS, which
Right.
is the Nuclear Material and
Which
Safeguards.
is,
So it's really just moving from an online inspection and review to more of a decommissioning, inspection and review branch commission.
I will just add, when we met with Commissioner Behrens, as we kind of step through what we typically do to communicate with the public, I think he was pleasantly impressed and actually surprised that we stream our committee meetings where Mary gives an update on the plant operations, the plant safety with the nuclear oversight, and then we have our independent, John, doing the nuclear oversight from an independent perspective, sharing that in the public setting in the committee, and then any items would actually go to the board and allow for public comment. And I think he was pleasantly surprised. That's not typically what they would see under current kind of utility practices across the nuclear reactor, at least 104 of them that are here in the United States. So he was pleasantly pleased and surprised about that, actually. So
Go public power.
there you go. Leading the way.
Okay, the next item has to do with dry cast storage, and the dry cast storage campaign. Oh, John, I'm sorry. It was such good news you gave me, John. I just-
Thank you, Director McGuire. A couple items for nuclear oversight to report out on. We did complete a nuclear fuels audit on May 26th. The team did not identify any issues adversely impacting implementation of the nuclear fuels program, past plant operations, or the effectiveness of the quality assurance program. We did identify 4 deficiencies and 2 enhancements. The deficiencies are really around some of the minor, I'll call them paperwork and procedure correctness, and so we've worked through that. Secondly, we are beginning a radiation protection audit that began on June 12th and will run for 2 weeks. Finally, as Mary mentioned, there is a fuel characterization effort that started on June 9th, and nuclear oversight will be aiding that from a safety and oversight angle. And I'll tell you that there's 944 bundles that we're working with, and Mary will go into more detail there, but it's hot, it's monotonous, it's repetitive, and so it's good to have that intervention occasionally and just a spot check to make sure that the awareness is high, and as we go through that, just a high level of safety awareness. And that's our operations that's doing that work with the fuel handling machine and Westinghouse technical oversight. So
It might be better flow for Mary just to talk about that right now. If you want to talk about it now, it's better flow. We're in the same discussion.
Quickly, how frequently do we do fuel characterization? Just curious. Is that annual?
no.
No, this fuel characterization is specifically set up so that we can move our spent fuel from
Wet
the
to
wet
dry.
pool
Okay.
over to the dry cast storage. So maybe, would you mind pulling up the slide? I'll go into the dry cask as well as the fuel characterization together. One of the items that we have to report today is a contract over $500,000, which is the Westinghouse contract to do the fuel sipping. In January, we had a number of individuals from Fort Calhoun come and present to the board our overview of what we intended to do with the fuel. And At that time, I said it was one of the major activities that we would do at Fort Calhoun as part of the decommissioning. As John said, we have 944 fuel assemblies, or fuel bundles, as I'll talk about them, in wet storage in the spent fuel pool. If you look at this drawing or this picture, hopefully you can see that on the left is a picture of the bundle. Difficult to see, but there is a doorway, a typical 8-foot doorway. This bundle is 12 feet tall, and so that kind of gives you the dimension. Each one of the fuel rods that are within that bundle, there's a maximum of 176 in that bundle, is about the size of the Sharpie. So the diameter is about the size of the Sharpie, 12 feet long. So we, as part of the characterization, we are visually inspecting 528 of those bundles, and then we have 416 that we'll actually do sipping on. And the reason that we do the sipping on the ones is that we know, as part of an industry issue that occurred back in the 90s, that there was defective fuel that was purchased from Westinghouse. It wasn't just at Fort Calhoun; it was anyone that purchased fuel from Westinghouse during that time frame. And I have a picture here of a few of the defects that we might find going forward. And it's really, as I said, you know, the one on the top where you see a little bit of a tear in the fuel cladding, again, you know, it's the size of the Sharpie, so they're very small defects. Pinhole leaks, they're typically referred to. And then on the strapping on the bottom, I don't know if you can see the little crack that's on the strapping. That's about an inch tall on a 12-foot bundle of 176 of these. So we're looking for very minute defects that were included as part of the fuel that we have. In order to identify these, what we do is we actually put them into, and we've hired Westinghouse to do this, we put them into a canister. Westinghouse creates a vacuum, and they will actually pull a vacuum on that, which releases the fissionable gases, and then they will analyze for those gases. If we find the evidence of gas, then we know that we have at least one fuel rod. So again, one of those maximum 176 in that bundle that has a pinhole leak in it. And so we will set that aside. This is important for us to understand how many of these we have and what condition the fuel is, because that's a requirement of us being able to move our fuel into the dry cask storage system that we would choose 5 years from now, or 4.5 years from now. Our fuel has to have 5 years worth of cooling in order to meet those requirements. So again, we're trying to set ourselves up to meet all of the requirements to move our fuel into a dry cask storage system within the 5-year time frame. This is done in series, as opposed to in parallel, because we want to know the condition of that fuel. Once we understand what the condition of the fuel is, then we will provide that information to the dry cask storage vendors. We anticipate putting out an RFP later this year to each one of those vendors. So again, we're waiting to get the fuel information to provide to them. When we have that, we'll put out the RFP. There are 3 vendors today that do this work. As you can tell, this is very complex work. It requires a lot of interaction with these vendors to understand the specifics around their individual storage systems. And so we will be asking the board later today at the board meeting for the approval to negotiate with this vendor and award a contract later this year. So it'll be about a 6-month evolution in us understanding their technical capabilities and all of the issues that we need to address from an engineering and technical perspective in order to actually settle in on the best vendor for Fort Calhoun. Take questions.
Is it safe to say that in the past, it's possible that some of these have been missed and moved to dry storage without, they can't get by?
No, we would have had to have done the same thing in order to meet the requirements for those that are already out on the SOC pad.
So there's no, I haven't been out there yet, so I'm trying to wrap my head around what this looks like. But there's, in terms of having a pinhole leak in their current wet storage state, there's no risk.
No,
We're all, okay.
no, there is no risk. And that's, why we store them the way we do and why we
Yeah.
monitor them and why we make sure that all the systems are we do all the preventative maintenance and the surveillance tests on the systems to
Yeah.
make sure that everything is handled well.
Okay.
Because it's actually these vendors who decide, after you do the SIPing and you have all of the information, the vendors decide what is the best way to put them into the bundles and how to arrange them. Is that
Yes,
correct?
and-
That's why it's so important to do this ahead of time.
Exactly. They have
Before
to
you
have
have the information.
specific configurations within those casts to make sure that they meet all of the technical specifications that they're licensed for. So they are actually licensed. They carry the license for the cast through the NRC. And so we need to confirm that we're meeting all the technical requirements.
Right. And at the NRC meeting, that was one of the discussions during the NRC meeting, we went into pretty much depth about these dry cast storage systems, of which the NRC, discussed it in depth, how they're the ones who give the licenses for these three vendors. These three vendors are the only ones by licensed, or
Yes.
the only ones licensed anyway, to do this. And that was one of their in-depth discussions, how they're very happy, they're very comfortable with these dry cast storage systems. They've been reviewed through the NRC and through the DOE and that type of stuff.
Yeah, and just, this is gonna be voted on at an action item, the reason why.
We haven't really gotten into it.
You gonna
yet.
get into that, why?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
gonna get, this is the next thing. Everything's sort of flowing together.
Making sure.
Well,
On the
as a new
continuum.
board member, this is very helpful. So.
Yeah, on the
Walking
continuum,
through
you
it.
have to do this characterization first, and we're lucky because
Yeah.
Westinghouse was able to do this sooner than we expected.
Actually, we chose Westinghouse and we actually moved our schedule out to accommodate their schedule.
But that was it. We knew we were
Just
gonna
because
use it.
of it was economically the best situation for us. And so in terms of a contract over $500,000, as we evaluated, there were only two vendors that do this sort of work. It was really economically the best thing for Fort Calhoun and for OPPD.
So this is going to get done, and then after that, it goes into our next board action item, which is the authorized management to enter into a contract to negotiate for a dry cast system supplier. So once they get all this information, there are three vendors that are available in this situation, and as far as doing that. And since it is going to be, it's not an open bid seal process, so it's going to be, negotiated, so it's going to require 2/3 vote. Mary, you want to talk about the three vendors for us, or?
Certainly. The three vendors that are out there today are Transnuclear, which is a subsidiary of Areva. They are the current cask vendor that we have. We have 10 of their casks currently. They're horizontally loaded cask out on the independent spent fuel storage installation pad today, or the ISFAC pad. NAC is the second vendor. They have a vertical system so they have vertical cask as opposed to horizontal cask. And then Holtec, they also have a vertical cask design. We have seen in the industry recently, over the last, I would say, 5 years, at least a few of the decommissioning power plants moving from the horizontal cask to the vertical cask. And we are doing benchmarking with those folks to understand all of the reasons and the discussions that they had behind making those decisions. So that just provides us some input and helps us to really understand the issues and what we need to do in order to engage these three vendors as we move through this RFP process. So they've been extremely helpful at the other nuclear facilities that have gone through this.
And then it's estimated that depending on the design that we choose, it'll be between 26 and 30 casks that we'll need?
Exactly. I will say that the pad that is out there currently is capable of handling the transnuclear cask up to about 32. And so we believe that As we go through this, we will be able to figure out a configuration for any one of these three vendors that will work to where we won't have to modify the pad that is currently poured out there. If we do run into that, then obviously we're going to have some other issues, and we'll have to figure out where we go. But at this point, to the best of our knowledge, unless we run into some issues later this fall, we don't anticipate that occurring.
And when you have these casks, after we get them, are we going to be moving the fuel all at one time, or are you going to be moving them at different times? I know it'll be totally unloaded by maybe 2022? Or what's your schedule on that? How does that work?
So we would have a cask campaign typically. There's a lot of equipment that you would move in. So the mobilization, these are large pieces of equipment that come in to move these. And so you would want to do it all at one time. So it's a good 6-month evolution to load all the fuel, if not 9 months, to load all the fuel into these casks and then move them out to the pad and get them situated on the pad. So it's a 6 to 9 month evolution, but it will all be done in one campaign.
What Mary and the team have done too is begin to create a clear path by taking down some buildings and some other infrastructure to allow a clear path rather than having to go outside the fence and move back around where we had to do that previously. So we now have a clear path right to the dry cask storage area.
And then this probably won't be to 2021, 2022, is that correct then?
Correct. That is
gotta be
currently
pulled
on our
up.
schedule is that we would start in 2021, and we are at least targeting to be done in 2022, maybe late 21, first quarter 22, kind of that time frame.
And can you just give me a sense for how robust these things are, these dry cask? I mean, from a risk management perspective.
We're starting to get into information that is safeguards information.
Okay.
So if we could take that offline.
Yep.
What I will say is that the NRC reviews this and that they are licensed to meet all of the design basis accidents that the NRC requires. So they're rather substantial.
Yep.
But these canisters, I was reading the engineer stuff. It's always fun to read the engineer stuff. But there's multi-purpose canisters. So you have multiple canisters that you put one into one and then another one into another. Is right? Is that correct? It's not just one thing, you put it in one.
You put them in a canister. Well, at least I'll talk about what we have up there today. You put them in a canister and then you put them into a concrete. What I would call a concrete structure where you slide it in there, and then that slides into the actual facility that's on the cask today. And we can certainly show you that when you get out there and take a tour.
Okay, if there's no other questions, that'll require a 2/3 vote this afternoon.
All right, great, thank you. All right, we'll move on to public information, Director Kavanaugh.
I just have one information item this month, and it's our monthly legislative update, and Tom Rogers will fill us in on his end of legislative session report, and also some of the scheduled summer study dates taking place in Mexico. Tom?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good
morning.
Nice to be here. I'm going to give you my year-end summary and interim studies that are scheduled for the year. You should have 2 documents. You should have a memo that I sent to Lisa, kind of a summary of the process, and a matrix of interim studies that are being introduced. I think it's on the memo's on diligent. So I'm going to start with that. The legislative wrap-up, the first session of the 105th session adjourned May 23rd. They adjourned on the 86th day of a 90-day session. They declared victory and went home. Overall, a couple of the major issues that were going on were trying to cap property taxes and trying to change the income tax structure. Neither of those major initiatives found a home. There was battles back and forth about which comes first, and didn't solve any of those questions in this session. The other thing that they did was they adopted the biennium budget. They originally adopted the Budget Committee's report, and then when it was sent on to the governor, he cut an additional $53 million out of the budget, and the legislature attempted to put those cuts back in, and they weren't successful in doing that. So it's $53 million or $55 million less than what the Budget Committee recommended. Early on, there were 3 bills before the Natural Resources Committee where we do most of our business dealing with public power. One dealt with deregulating public power, one dealt with unbundling bills for public power, and the other one changed the eminent domain statutes as it related to transmission and generation. All 3 of those bills and a number of others were indefinitely postponed early in the session and allowed us to focus on 2 bills that we wanted to get through. Those 2 bills were LB 143 that changed the licensing fleet process for public power districts, which was passed and signed by the governor, went into effect upon his signature back in early May or late April, and they'll be able to use, the fleet guys will be able to use it for their registration this coming year. The second thing that passed was a bill that dealt with environmental surveillance, a service that the state provides at Fort Calhoun Station. That was LB 430. That bill was signed by the governor. They didn't have an emergency clause on it. It will take effect 90 days after the governor's signature, which is in early May, something like that. 90 days after that, there's not a need to get it done this year, but it'll be teed up for when they need to end that service in the next few months. So I want to change the focus and talk about interim studies. There were 3 interim studies that were introduced dealing with public power. I want to finish my memo and then we'll go to the matrix. The main one that's introduced is LR 125 dealing with public power, introduced by Senator Hughes, the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. He structured it so it deals primarily with direction of public power boards of directors, regulatory oversight by the SPP, the role of the Public Service Commission, the role of the Power Review Board, and it will focus on that sometime in the early fall, later in the fall and early winter. An interim study runs a range. An interim study can be as simple as no action at all. It can be a report that's issued by the committee, or it could be a full-blown committee with counsel and consultants. I don't look for any of these studies that I'm reporting to you to take up a consultant to do them. They're going to rely either on experts in the industry that they're studying, or they'll use their legal counsel to do so. Senator Wayne introduced a couple of interim studies dealing with public power on unbundling bills, deregulation, and eminent domain. And if you switch over to the matrix that I gave you that kind of outlines the bills, I will kind of follow up on those at this point. I've already mentioned, I'm just going to hit the highlights of the ones that we'll be watching closely. I'll answer any questions you have about any of them, but I'm going to hit the highlights. I've already kind of talked about LR 125 by Senator Hughes. 159, I'm going to jump ahead to LR 159. It's an interim study to examine issues under the jurisdiction of the Natural Resources Committee. These are broad stroke resolutions that allows them to study anything that they want to study under their jurisdiction. It's just something wide-ranging so that they can have a clear path if they want to do something, to examine something. The one that's kind of interesting is LR 176. This is an interim study on broadband telecommunications. There's a number of rural senators who don't feel that broadband is deployed enough in rural Nebraska, and this will study that issue. There's a number of rural senators that have signed on to this. But the one part that's really interesting in this study is that it talks about municipal and municipal and political subdivision entrance into the broadband business. That always causes a stir between the telecommunications companies and the broadband providers. We try to stay on the side of that issue, but you know it gets brought up occasionally, and we're going to be dealing with it during the interim study period. And the next one's LR 177, deals with another one of the broad-ranging jurisdictions of the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee. LR 203 is an interim study surrounding the relocation of utilities in public right-of-ways. There's a real range on what public utilities charge for getting into an easement. Some are very, very high, some are very, very low, and this will be an attempt to kind of study and find a way to figure out where a median or a good place to be is for public utilities on their charges for right-of-way acquisition. If you flip over on 211, it's examining customer choice. This was introduced by Senator Wayne, LR 211. It's concerning deregulation and unbundling bills. Senator Kowalski has LR 239, examining solar deployment in the state. What are the roadblocks? What kinds of incentives are needed? And that's fairly high on the committee's priority list to examine during the interim, meaning that we'll get a hearing, we'll get a study, we'll get time before the committee to take up the issue. Senator Wayne has LR 243. It's an interim study to examine issues related to eminent domain. When you read that one, it primarily, I think, is dealing with the XL pipeline, but it also mentions its transmission, eminent domain authority, and but again, like I said, I think it's primarily focusing on the XL pipeline. And lastly, from the ones that I've highlighted, is LR 245. There was a bill introduced by Senator Brewer to ban development of industrial wind development in the Sandhills. This is an interim study to look at that issue further and have more discussions on whether or not that's a feasible thing to do for farmers and ranchers in the Sandhills. I will stop at this point. We have a lot of activities going on to kind of keep telling our story in the legislature. And we'll be actively involved in an education effort to let senators know about public power and how OPPD is responding to the markets today. And I will report back with a legislative preview in December of 2017. And I will have director's updates for you on a weekly basis as needed. We're kind of in a lull period right now, and I'm not sure how many of you'll see just right out of the chute, but as we get further towards the session, I'll make sure you get noticed in director's update.
Hey, Tom, here's a question that I have, and this is a kind of a big picture macro, is the state budget was running a deficit of, I don't know if it was 230 million or 500, or I don't know the number, but I just knew that when the Governor Ricketts said we have a huge deficit in our budget, how was that created? I always thought that Nebraska was a pretty austere state, that we kept our spending and our budget items pretty much in sync, and we didn't do anything that was too crazy, but then we see this big deficit. How did that happen, and can you just explain it? You don't have to do it.
I'll give you a thumbnail sketch of it.
Okay.
First of all, I think it was closer to 700 million when they started. About $700 million.
Okay, 700 million.
They closed the gap with some of the reserve funds. I want to say between 2 and 3, and I didn't track it real close, but between 2 and 300 million, they closed it with the reserve funds that they have, much like we do. They closed some of the gap that way. To answer your question, I think it's mostly revenue driven. I don't think there's huge differences in how they go about paying for things, at least from what I can gather, how the state has budgeted things. I think it's primarily the rural economy has taken a turn. You're not seeing $10 or $8 and $9 corn. You're seeing $3 corn. So I just think it's been a downturn in the economy. And any more than that, I'd have to speculate, and I'm not willing to do that. But I think it's primarily a revenue-driven situation.
Okay, so the money's just not coming in
It's
terms
not
of
coming in
sales
like it was.
or property tax.
And even during the times that it was coming in, I would say that my observation is a pretty austere budget at those times, even when the times were rolling. I think they were smart to set aside the money that they did in the reserve funds, because they always talk about a rainy day, and it came this year. So that'd be my take.
What about tax incentives for businesses or something that employ so many people or create so many different jobs? I'd heard that people or businesses didn't take their, is it 777 or?
Well, originally it was 775.
775.
Nebraska Advantage
Nebraska
Act.
Advantage,
Okay.
yeah.
So we just got $7 million
From the state?
from the Nebraska Advantage
Okay.
Act.
So finish your question, I didn't hear
Yeah,
that.
was the Nebraska Advantage Act, is that costing the state more than what they predicted or promoted?
That's a whirlwind that, there are some who believe that the Advantage Act creates the revenues needed to help grow the state. There are others that don't see that happening. It's a constant struggle trying to get information about how those incentives work. I'll tell you that some of those incentives have a direct impact on local governments, like cities that are doing projects. I think it probably has an impact on them, maybe even more so than the state, because they have to pay those incentives at some point when a business hits such and such a threshold, and I think it catches them off guard at time about how much that they have to set aside to do that. But to answer your question, I don't know enough about it to give you a direct answer, other than I know that there are both ends of the spectrum that lead one way or the
I'll
other.
just share my economic development, chair of the Economic Development Council had, even though I'm not doing that this year. Well, we've looked at that over the past years. There's an economic benefit to the state to do that. And again, I think the current issue that we have in play is about revenue. It's not necessarily about cost. I would say they are looking at changing the Nebraska Advantage Act and to really make it even more applicable to potential customers wanting to expand or locate in the state. But we've seen some of the analysis around that where it does create the economic drivers that you want to create in the state. And it's part of the quiver that all states have and use. And so we are, again, compared and contrast to many of those states in many of those ways. And so it's just part of the tools the state needs to have in place.
And we need to stay competitive.
Exactly.
And we did get $7 million of that.
Maybe a lot.
Other questions?
Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll report back in December, and like I said, if there's things needed before that, I will note in director's update. And you're always welcome to call me if you have questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Anything else? That's it? All right, we'll move on to System Management, Director Hurley.
And we also talked last Monday, had a couple of things that have come up. I think John was going to give us a report on that somebody's going to do over 500,000.
Yeah, we'll go with the over 500,000 first, and give a wind update in the closed section.
All right.
So the first one, I'll turn it over to Joshua to talk about the portable radios and repeaters upgrade.
I'll cover that.
Oh, okay.
Those are to basically replace the radios and repeaters that we have. And the portable radios, we mainly use them for operation purposes, and the crews use them on a daily basis, sometimes even for safety or security officers. I think we're replacing about, and if I'm wrong, correct me, Josh, I think we're replacing about 150 this year and another 150 next year. And the repeaters, a little bit, much less than that, I think.
Yes.
And the reason we did not, we did not go with a sealed bed, mainly it's more of an upgrade than a replacing the whole system. and they're getting to the end of life. I think some of them, the end of life is like
How old
this
are they?
year. I'm not really sure how old they are.
So some of them, so the age is over 20 years for some of the repeaters, so we're talking.
Those 800 band radios then?
Yes, yes. So for the repeaters,
We have
they're.
our
Right.
own-
But you
we have our
typically,
own repeater tower?
the repeaters are basically to provide more coverage, similar to the cell phone antennas, to provide more coverage. That's the same kind of concept with the repeaters. And when we talk about end of life, I mean, we're talking about no parts to,
First thing that goes through your
right,
mind
and
is
no maintenance,
with all
no
the
support from
technology
the
we have
manufacturer,
now, why do we really need to continue with radios when everybody out there has a cell phone?
That's a great question, and I think the utility has asked that question, and really for two main things, and again, I'll ask Josh to step in here, but I think it's security and reliability. It's our own system, and if you look at other entities, I think they use the same thing. They use those portable radios. But in the future, who knows?
Yeah, I think, what we saw even, you go back to, I think if you saw in 9/11, you saw cell phone coverage not able to occur because of
They go
just
down,
the amount of, and the volume of calls that occurred. And I think what you even saw there is the inability of, law enforcement agencies and other first responders not to be able to communicate. What we have the capability to do across our partnership with Washington County, Douglas County, Pottawatomie County, and hopefully Sarpy County in the future is allow that communication to occur within this region. There's conversations as we brief the board on in the director's update, the ability to partner with the state as well, and so those conversations will continue. But this really will shore up kind of our Orion agreement with these metropolitan counties on their 911, on their mobile radio, and the interface around it. This really also allows us to meet our contractual commitment to make sure that we're updating when technology updates within that contract. And so we're continuing down the path to maintain those relationships with those counties.
Two quick follow-ups. You don't get cell service everywhere in my district, I'm just saying. And the second is, so did I hear you say that this is related to that discussion that's going on with locals and state?
It certainly is with our current
It
contract with
supports them,
Orion, right, to make sure that we meet our continual contract, to make sure, as everybody has, is to make sure they continue to upgrade and update technology to meet the needs of that communication infrastructure. So that is, yes, that is the case. We're continuing down that path to refine the agreements with the parties. Just as, as we kind of look forward, we are looking at having that conversation about refining the agreements we currently have with the different counties. And then, obviously, the state has kind of brought in some conversation that's kind of been pushed off to the side until we feel there's a really advantageous opportunity for us to really pursue that.
Thank you.
Is this $2.5 million for equipment, or is it for the entire setup of the service?
It's really equipment, I
It'd
believe,
be-
right?
it'd be
Repeaters and
both. It'd be mainly
radios.
equipment, the radio equipment, but there'd be some services as well, but mainly equipment.
And then will we install this equipment ourselves?
I'll look at
Primarily ourselves with some of the vendor support as well.
And then these radios will last 20 years like the last ones?
I'm not going to bet on that technology question.
Don't wanna
Kind of like
speculate.
refrigerators and washers and dryers,
I hope not.
They'll last 20 years, don't they?
or two.
They used to.
Any other questions? The next item
Yep.
is fees to the NEQ.
Yep, I'll cover that. So it's in the amount of $636,500 for the Nebraska Department of Environmental Control. And this is for our area emission fees for Nebraska City Station, Cass County Station, and Sarpy County Station. So it's an annual.
Explain those fees, what are those fees?
I am going to defer to my colleague Russ, if you want to. Permitting fees, yeah.
morning.
Morning.
I'm Russ Baker, the Manager of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs, and each year, by the end of March, we submit into the EPA in the state of Nebraska what our emissions were for the preceding year. Those are called air emission inventories. The state of Nebraska has air permitting authority over Nebraska City Station, Cass County Station, and Sarpy County Station. So they take the emissions that are submitted, they charge you a fee on a per ton basis, primarily for sulfur dioxide, SO2, and nitrogen oxides, NOx, which are capped at 4,000 tons per facility. And then they charge the fee in order to administer and manage the Title V air permit program that they have in the state of Nebraska. Likewise, the city of Omaha will do the same for North Omaha Station and Jones Street Station. We haven't received the invoice yet for them, so they'll go to the two different air regulatory entities, and it's based on emissions from the preceding year that we pay for those.
Is this higher or lower than last year?
They're holding pretty steady, Director McGuire. What we saw this year was the fee was increased from $71 per ton of emissions to $78. We're expecting about another $10 increase next year. The NDEQ every year does a explanation of what those fees are collected for, and then they do a projection for the next year. And so we're looking at probably the upper $80 per ton. So even though our emissions may be going down on a facility base, they need to collect those monies in order to kind of manage and administer the permitting, and it's going to cause a problem in the next several years. The state's aware of that, and they're trying to determine what the best way to administer those programs and to collect fees in a fair manner across all the different sources that they have. So we see them going up, our emissions are going down, and you see a relatively flat fee that we're paid or that we end up paying in total.
Hey Russ, in 2016, what was our total amount of tonnage?
So for sulfur dioxide at Nebraska City Station, we had around 14,000 tons that were emitted between the two units, because it's based on a facility basis, not a per unit basis, even though it's calculated. And then at North Omaha, for sulfur dioxide, we emitted a little over 7,000. I can get you the exact number, Director Barrett. I've got the total across the whole fleet that I had, which was like 23,600 tons. For SO2, for NOx, total between North Omaha and Nebraska City, it was 9,105 tons. Nebraska City Station was close to 5,000 tons. And at North Omaha Station, it was a little like 3,600 tons of nitrogen oxides. So we've seen a decrease in the nitrogen oxide emissions because of the retirement of units 1, 2, and 3, but not a whole lot, and they're capped at 4,000 tons per facility.
Here's just a science question: is if you ran a tube and just visualize, run like a vacuum tube from the smokestacks down into a dumpster, would that be a solid particulate or would that be a gas? What comes out of the smokestacks?
So it would be gaseous, SO2, and nitrogen oxides would be gaseous. We do get charged for particulates as well, which is just an incremental adder, not a whole lot that goes into that. The primary drivers for it are SO2 and NOx on that.
Okay, is a ton by weight or is it by volume? How do you measure? When you say 14,000 tons of a gas?
Right.
How is it measured?
So it would be based on It would, well, you could do it either way.
It's
It would
weight,
be-
but there's a
Yeah.
calculation when it's gas.
Right, so you have to go through a conversion. It would be based on weight though, because it's based on tons, a weight measurement on that.
I mean, similar to CO2, same
Right.
thing. You're
Right.
measuring in tons.
That's right.
Gaseous, but, and then we could get into a discussion about it, atmospheric pressure or not, and what the temperature of it is, and kind of the laws that govern whether gases change to solids.
Be a good
and that
physics
too.
problem.
Okay, so is it a weight?
Calculation.
So
Is it a weight of the
It's
gas?
weight.
That's
it's
correct.
weight.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weight. Tons.
In tons.
And then that's, all that sheer tonnage of gas is shared with everybody around? Or goes out in the atmosphere?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any catching device or back end or
Sure.
Okay.
So on Nebraska City.
scrubbers?
On Nebraska City Unit 2, exactly. We use a scrubber, which helps to interact with the sulfur dioxide, brings it down, forms it into a solid. It goes out as an ash.
Okay.
And reduces that. On the nitrogen side, we have the selective catalytic reduction unit, which takes and interacts with the nitrogen oxides through the catalyst and reduces the NOx you can do for that. For CO2, because you mentioned it, there are some pilot studies where they're doing carbon capture and sequestration on that to try to collect that gas and try to store it. Usually it's subterranean that they're trying to do that, but they're also looking at treatment methodologies as well to do that. So there are technologies that'll do it.
Okay.
Just, the permit is permission to emit. That's the way I think about it.
Okay, it's not per ton. It's not, you show
No,
them, go.
but it's the quantity amount that you are permitted.
Okay.
You have permission to emit.
Okay.
And I think you mentioned this, but could you just remind me again? I think I missed in the notes. This income for the NDEQ is funding what?
Their Title V air permit program, so all the
Okay.
major sources in the state of Nebraska get a Title V permit, and these permit fees through Title 129, which are the air pollution regulations, dictate that the state of Nebraska will collect those fees from major sources, use that money then in terms of administration and management across the state of Nebraska. So it pays for their payroll, it pays for any of the other resources that they need to manage those permits.
Russ, who's the biggest emitter in the state? Or what site?
So I would say that would be Gentleman Station. They have 2 units that are there. It kind of depends a little bit because they have a bag house that's also on it, but they're unscrubbed units. They don't have selective catalytic reduction, so they would have more emissions than we would, followed by Nebraska City Station.
Okay.
In North Omaha, we also have some new
We have dry sorbent.
dry sorbent injections.
Injection and mercury capture.
Mercury capture.
Right, all the units have mercury capture now. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. The next item is, we already discussed the fuel characterization services by Westinghouse in the amount of 1.2, just over $1.2 million. If there's no other questions on that, we'll move on to the fourth item. The fourth item is contract to McKinsey & Company for work with the integrated energy platform at $1.5 million, and I'll let Scott take it from there.
Great, hello again. Last December, we spoke with the board about 7 strategic initiatives. One of them was the integrated energy platform. We've since changed that name as we've learned more to Integrated Energy Marketplace. It felt a little bit more appropriate and less confusing because of really what we're thinking. When we talk about the marketplace, there's so much that's happening and so many changes that are happening that could influence everything from the way we generate, to the way we transmit, to the way we distribute, and ultimately to the way we serve energy. And what this investment, what we were going out and seeking, was expertise that could help us really think through this. The order and the magnitude of the kinds of decisions we're talking about are very significant to the district. If we took a look at something like AMI, or advanced metering infrastructure, it could be anywhere from 75 to 150 million. Our goal here is to make sure that we have the infrastructure that allows us to provide you, the board, and the senior management, the kind of information that you would need in order to make well-researched, informed, and actionable decisions based upon recommendations. The process we went through is we went out and we sought responses from 5 vendors. We did receive responses from 4, and really with 4 tasks in front of us. One was we wanted to assess the changing utility environment, what all is happening out there, what all has happened, what have we learned from that, what have our competitors going to help us so we can see early warning signs, when did they invest too early, when should we make these investments, that kind of thing. The second is, what are the impacts for us broadly? This is one component of our business model. So how do we integrate and align the entire business model and look at what non-traditional events in the industry could have in terms of impact for us internally? Thirdly, how do we develop and evaluate the various options that we have in front of us? And fourthly, we wanted to make sure that we create a roadmap with signposts. I want to pause for a second because up front what I should have done too is acknowledge that each of these initiatives do have a strategic initiative champion. In this case, Tim Burke is overseeing the broader initiative. And secondly, really the person who's doing the work that I'm speaking to, managing teams and cross-functional teams, is Troy Vai, who I think you all know. He heads our energy production and marketing group, but he's also in charge of running this overall initiative. So ultimately, the punchline is we're going to be creating a roadmap, and this roadmap will allow us to identify what are those signposts and those assumptions that we're making, what's changing in the environment that might change the assumptions we're making and may slow up or speed down what we would recommend in terms of when and how to make investments. We assessed the people that responded to this based really upon their experience and their capabilities, business planning and modeling methodologies, project management team and approach, pricing, terms and conditions. And as we went through the scoring of this, and we being, there's a large cross-functional team represented at the division manager, director level across the organization, scored, came up with a recommendation, reviewed it with senior management, and came up with McKinsey really as achieving the highest value for us and for OPPD. Thoughts or questions?
This is exactly what I'm interested in. Actually, I was interested in writing an SD about this, about emerging technologies and the upcoming distributed generation. And we really need to do this research and figure out exactly where we are. And I think Craig probably wants to pipe in on that one.
Yeah, I'm certainly intrigued by this, and I think you've probably seen that, from a strategic directive standpoint, I'm sort of chewing around a distributed energy resources strategic directive to try and look at this. I was intrigued by what Black and Veatch had done with SMUD on their distributed energy resources planning. And this feels sort of really similar in that it's kind of, they're helping with some of the early work and then providing us, I think, a tool that we can use on an ongoing basis to really continually reevaluate kind of where we're going, how the marketplace is shifting.
I think there's some similarities. I can't speak specifically to the Black and Veatch
Sure.
SMUD. I think it was more tightly focused on
The DER, yeah.
And this is actually
bigger.
Yeah, this is more broad than that.
Yeah, so the SMUD specifically had state requirements, had state mandates that they had to kind of determine how they were going to do what they were going to do. So the answer was determined for them. They had to figure out what's the best way to begin to put it together. And even some of our conversations with them, they've done some things only because they were required to do. Sure. It may not have been the right business decision to do, but they were required to do it by statute. So that is, obviously the stuff that we're going to be looking at as well.
Yeah.
Certainly around that. When do the lines cross to do things that we ought to do, and when don't they cross, and what's our reaction to them, what's that look like? So the plan will be to come back to the board probably in the fall timeframe to kind of say, here's what that signpost looks like based on the work that we've done, and here are the actions and the initiatives following up that we want to spend time and energy on, whatever that may look like. Yeah. And so that's kind of where the team is right now, and putting together kind of that base case.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm really excited about it. How does this compare to the integrated resource planning work that we do? Would this inform the IRP process, or is that, is it narrower? Or help me understand
I would say this is, so the IRP, the original intent of an IRP is to say, what is your lease generation for your needs going forward? Very clearly, whatever it is on what it looks like today. And so, even some of the conversations we've had around the IRP that we submitted earlier this year, I had a chance to talk to the CEO of WAPA. Everyone pretty much does it the same way that we do it. It's an IRP that's required to file. They don't do anything with it. The decisions come after the fact, right? The decisions come based on whether you want additional wind resources, whether you want different changes in methodology, and so, or in whatever those resources may look like, whether it's distributed resources, baseline resources, capacity resources. So it's looking at all of that and your projected load and how are you going to meet the capacity needs and all those pieces. And it's really around a least option integrated resource portfolio framework. What's the least cost option? That's how the IRPs are traditionally based. So this may come through and say, is it at the pace of value for us to do something different? Or how will we reduce our peak? Or how will we increase our use of other resources because it is more cost effective to do that? The conversation we'll have in closed session on our status on the wind contract will be an interesting conversation. But it really was based on the IRP. Now we're coming with a point where the board has given us authority to negotiate and execute, and we'll do that update with the board on that. There may be some things that don't show up in the IRP, which is some of the community solar stuff that I'll give an update on in the president's report. It's probably not a big enough kind of deal to make an integrated resource plan, even though we looked at utility grade solar in the integrated resource plan and kind of said it's not at the pace of value today. So these are going to be ones where, we used to kind of do these over a 20-year period of time, but my guess is with technology, battery storage, solar, we'll be doing these more just to see if there are other alternatives that we ought to explore.
Sure.
And this gets not just on those items, but other structural things around rates, around other capabilities, around products and services that we ought to begin to do at the C&I level, at the other markets that we ought to maybe begin to spend some time and energy around. And so that'll be the conversation that we'll probably have this fall on all of our SIs, our strategic initiatives, as we kind of roll through, that really line back up to our strategic directives very clearly.
So thank you for that. That's a very helpful explanation. I think I have two more questions. One is, can you help me get a sense for how much of the load McKinsey is going to carry versus how much Troy and his team and the strategic initiative group that's like, is McKinsey kind of carrying it, or is there? Give me a sense for how that works.
I can make a little bit of a guess, but I'd actually defer to Troy, and I know that
he's on crutches.
Are on crutches, but it helps.
Sorry, we can bring a mic to you.
Here he comes.
So obviously Troy's not carrying a lot on his back, he's on crutches, but he is carrying a big load.
I'm usually walking around with a backpack.
That's right.
My drinks and so forth. But to give you an idea, we have 18 individuals in OPPD who are focused on this. 7 of them are basically either 50% of their time to up to sometimes 100% of their time is focused on it. We have some director level people that 25% of their activities are focused on it. So it's really a joint collaborative effort.
Okay.
And it comes from both directions. So we're spending a lot of time and resources on making sure that we're comfortable with what we're analyzing and how we're analyzing it, and what kind of data we're using.
The value with McKinsey in this example of this contract is really to give us the data quicker, faster than for us to either have to create it or get it from other multiple sources.
Yeah.
Where they've done a lot of this work in the course of all their work, but it's a very quick opportunity for us to grab the data, analyze it, compare it to whatever we want to compare on our system and our needs and our circumstances, and to begin to put together what that play looks like.
It is clear it's not a one-size-fits-all, so every utility looks a little different. It's kind of interesting because they recognize that up front too. That, what works for this utility may not work for you, and so you really have to tailor it and understand how it's applied with your current construct.
But to your point, Director Moody, I think what we're building is the strategy muscle, right? That we're having, one key person from McKinsey is assisting the team. but the strategy muscles being developed with the OPPD folks. And again, as we've talked in our strategy session, you know, there'll be a day where we won't have anybody from, you know, McKinsey working with us on any item, right? Because we're building that strategy muscle to kind of continue us forward. And that's really the value, is have us think broader, stronger, but allow that to be transitioned to the strong team to carry it forward.
So the other thing I would,
Of those 18 people, you know, our planning groups are involved with that, T&D, generation,
Yeah.
finance. I mean, it's really a cross-functional group to develop that. That was something that we wanted to make sure that we focused on.
so Troy and I think the same, I was gonna say the same thing, and then on the tactical, how to use this information, we're making very concerted efforts to take the tools and the information they have and integrate it into the IRP, into load forecasting systems, into the financial models, into the rate structure. So the mechanics behind of it is also being integrated. Actually, this morning, that was my first meeting, is to review what they're doing, so.
Cool.
And I have
Go ahead, Ann.
I just have a question as far as time frame. You said November or the fall. I have a feeling that we're gonna keep McKinsey on longer than that. Is that correct?
Not really. There may be certain elements that we have a short stint for them to do, but pretty much, you know, they're not in fossil any longer. They're not in T&D any longer. We're moving through. We've developed our Center of Excellence with Joe Wazak kind of leading that, kind of tailored to the different executives. But we have 6 people that are working with the Center of Excellence on the cost and process improvement initiatives that have been identified. So from a cost and process improvement, we're just about done in that regard. We're going to keep them along until the fall, I believe, is kind of the time frame where we will have kind of a clear kind of recommendation on the integrated energy marketplace and what that may look like. But it's really not to have them be here for long periods of time. Have them give us their expertise, their knowledge, assist us, move them on, and we'll have the strategy muscle to kind of continue forward.
And most of the $1.5 million are coming from the data we're receiving or the information? or
It's
where they're
some
coming?
people, we bring in experts in certain levels of time. So a DER expert we'll bring in to understand that. They'll bring somebody with a customer experience component on what they've done on the C&I side. And so it's really bringing that expertise in when we need it to kind of develop the overall strategy going forward.
This has been going on how long that McKinsey's been involved?
Well, there's been multiple initiatives. So on the cost and process improvement initiative, that started in June of 2015.
That's what I want to say.
yeah.
This contract, $1.5 million, didn't start this month. This has been a long-term contract.
It started 2 months ago, a month ago.
Okay.
It's for IE.
Well, but
Yeah,
this
just for
contract-
this initiative.
But this is
Separate
a
by this
separate
contract is-
contract from the previous contract? That's what I'm trying to...
This is speaking very specifically to the work of the integrated energy market.
Just
Correct.
right now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I
previous
just
2
wanted,
years
because
of
we
work
had them
is
before.
around the
Cost piece, which we're just
Okay.
about done, and
Okay.
we'll move forward with that.
The last thing I would say is I'm super excited about this. But I certainly, but's not the right word. I expect that some of our more actively engaged constituents
Yes.
would look at this and go, how can we help?
Yep.
So I don't know what the answer to that is,
Yes.
but I certainly could imagine that, you know, they are very interested in sort of what the future of the utility is. And so if there's a way to align that with our current strategic directive around stakeholder engagement, I don't know what that looks like or what that is, but put that in the back of your pocket for now.
Yeah, I think
And
I
actually-
think our intent is we have to do the internal analysis and understand the impacts across the district and the timing of pieces that may fit or may not fit, whatever that may look like. But then at that point in time, then I think it's the conversation we have with the board and maybe the broader community about what this vision may look like in this initiative, right?
Sure.
I'd like to double down on that last comment and a little bit more, let's dig. So what's the timeline in reporting during the process and development? Tim, you said that the public entity set down conditions for SMUD that may not have been business correct. And yet, we are a public utility, and indeed, the public may want something. So, you know, we do need, I feel it's important that stakeholders are involved in some way, and maybe that's through the board. you know, the question that Director Moody had earlier about how does this relate to the IRP, I thought there was a sense that the IRP was going to be what I hear this may turn out to be, you know, the integrated energy markets. So far, we haven't been able to look under the hood at what the framework is or what assumptions are for calculations. And
Of calculations of?
well, whatever you're determining in the integrated energy market.
Oh, well, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
I mean, yeah, like the cost.
I didn't know if you meant IRP is what I,
No,
I didn't know that.
No,
Okay.
I meant here.
Yeah. I don't think
It's-
we all
it's
know that
reported-
either.
It's reported in the IRP,
We're not
yes,
ready, they're
yeah.
not ready to present yet, I feel.
Yes, well, and yet, if you go so far down the road without getting some feedback, it's difficult to go a different direction. So, so I would encourage, if there's not, if you feel that is important for the public at large to hear about this in the fall, that there should be some kind of reporting to a work committee or part of the board about what's happening and how issues are framed and where it looks like things are going.
Sure, yeah, I think our intent on the strategic initiatives anyway was to come back when they are at some form rather than in just conceptual, right?
Yeah.
So we've shared kind of the conceptual about what we're looking at. Now we're creating some form around it. That certainly has capability to change, there's no doubt about it, right?
Okay.
But we're gonna create some form, bring it and present it in a manner that we think is, one, focused on our strategic directives, focused on what we see, what we feel, how we feel the marketplace interface is gonna look like in the future and in the short term and maybe even the longer term. So if you give us some time to let the teams kind of begin to vet that out, I think what you'll see is, you know, we'll have a fairly significant list of things that won't be complete late fall, right? It'll be that concept about what we want to do going forward, and that's where I think the perspective of the board and at that point in time, as we think about what those items may be, where we'll use our stakeholder process to get that feedback and input at that time.
So the timeline for this contract that we're talking about is a couple months ago to.
Yeah, I think the team started a couple months ago, probably started the McKinsey folks 6 weeks ago, or the individual primarily that serves on the team. Yeah, and our plan is to run it through the
September,
late fall,
October.
September timeframe, so.
With their availability.
The contract's up
too,
and
that's-
gone by the time you come back to us with.
I would agree.
The internal team is
Yeah,
still going.
I'm
I
not
get
sure
that.
that's true. I think our plan is kind of in that July, August timeframe is come back with, here's where we are in our strategic initiative work, right? Here are the 7 initiatives, here where we are, and an update on each one of those, and what that may look like. And our work's gonna continue. Again, this is a shot, a data input. We're building some of that base knowledge and information knowledge, market knowledge, and so we'll be in a position to kind of share where we are and where we believe that direction looks like. So.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Is that the last one?
Is that it?
Well, I think the last thing, just, we did talk about in system management was the Nebraska City Unit 2 outage that occurred from April 1st to May 13th. It was scheduled to go to the 15th, but as I mentioned earlier, we were done 2 days early, so good drive by the staff and the team that worked on that at Nebraska City, and everybody that was involved, including Mo's team and Mary's team. As I mentioned before, kind of the highlights, or from a high-level view, the HPIP rotor replacement was kind of the marquee iteration that was accomplished during that time. We did replace some high-energy piping, steam piping that was deemed to be unacceptable over the long term, right? We were able to run a couple years with it, but we did replace that, so that project's complete as well. Replaced some air preheater baskets, some of the NOx capture equipment, catalytic reduction equipment, and then completed the outage with chemical cleaning, which is to remove a lot of the oxides inside the tubes which gives you better efficiency in the long term and keeps your equipment more reliable. And so with that, I think there was about 50,000 hours, over 50,000 hours that the staff completed. Number of tasks was around 1,300. And so imagine, in that short period of time, there's a lot of coordination that goes on. We talk about an integrated schedule, and we throw that term out there like it's pretty easy, but it really involves a lot of coordination and teamwork getting through that, and a lot of dedication by the staff during that short period of time. And so I'll tell you, just, we talked about it yesterday at one of our meetings, team meetings, about, what are the strategic directives that are involved in that. Clearly, safety is one, reliability, cost effectiveness, environmental stewardship, replenishing some of the equipment, and ensuring our emissions are well within limitations. And so, that's our drive. I believe that we accomplished the goal there, and just fine work done by the staff on that outage. So,
Great job.
Kudos.
If I can comment on one thing, we always talk about our renewable energy and everything, and we've sort of not mentioned coal because it might not be politically correct, but the fact of the matter is we need that base load plant right now. And it's important to have that coal plant right now. If that was shut down, we'd be in big trouble. If we didn't get NC2 up by now and running, we'd be in trouble right now. Having to get it would be a great cost to us, and we might have trouble with reliability. And I think people have to understand that. We've done a great job with renewable, but we need those coal plants right now.
Well, if you didn't have the baseload generation and capacity that comes with it, you'd have to build additional capacity, which would drive and put pressure on rates. There's no doubt about it.
yeah, I think, from a generation aspect, supply, I think there are three things that kind of go hand in hand. It's the renewables, it's the quick start generation that fills in that intermittency, but also your base load. Especially, it becomes more pronounced during these peak periods, right? When it's a widespread heat wave that hits SPP and MISO and some of the other RTOs. The baseload generation is a good asset to have.
Because wind not blowing in August.
Thank you.
That it for systems? All right. Just to state in public, when we do get to executive session on the update on the wind tower purchase agreement, I'm going to step out of the room. I represent several wind developers in the Nebraska legislature, and I don't want to know what's going on, and I haven't known, so I'll just step out during that time. So just put that out there for all.
Thank you.
All right. Governance.
Governance Committee met. We have two reporting items. First one is severance agreements for Fort Calhoun Station decommissioning, and Jerry Rainey is going to give us the update.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to report to the board the execution of some severance agreements. This was on the April 30th reduction in force at Fort Calhoun. There were a total of 32 employees that were in impacted positions at Fort Calhoun. 27 of those severance agreements involve payments greater than $50,000, and therefore it's a subject to a requirement for reporting to the board. So the list for those severance agreements is a part of the attachment for your review.
And Mary has given us the employee count and who has been, just all the positions. So these are the severance individuals. Any questions?
I think I've just got a quick question. So it says, for exempt employees to sue the district through their layoff date in exchange for release of claims, and we've got the labor unions include the same severance program. So this list, is this only exempt employees that are on this list, or is this?
That's a complete list.
That's complete.
So that's a complete
both.
list of
Okay.
both. That's correct.
Okay.
Anything else? The second reporting item would be our governance initiative. Scott, you're back at the podium.
I feel like
You're busy.
calisthenics today. It's really quite good. So what I'm providing here really is a commitment to have an update on a monthly basis between now and the July 24th board workshop on governance. I think all of you are aware of this now, but for the benefit of anyone who may be listening, the Corporate Governance Initiative really was chartered by the Board Governance Committee on December 16th of 2014 and then approved by the board, really through a series of multiple workshops throughout 2015 and many hours and multiple days. The board developed a taxonomy and policies really designed to deliver on what's intended here in bullets. And I think the easiest way to really be thinking about this is our SDs, strategic directives, our policies that try to capture what the board believes and wants in terms of customers' expectations and commitments that they would like the organization to be making, and those are the strategic directives. Our governance practice policies are the policies that the board has elected in terms of how it's choosing or would like to govern itself. And then the BL or the board staff linkage policies are the policies that the board has defined in terms of how they're delegating authority to the CEO, who then in turn makes everything, delegates everything into the organization. And then we have the monitoring process, which is us showing the relevant results that we're delivering, and hopefully we're delivering on the SDs. So everything that we do is really centered in creating and bringing this system to life in terms of the overall governance. The policy workshop, this is really highlighting what we talked about last month. On July 24th is from 8 to 5, and it's designed to do some specific things. The way I view this workshop really is just a continued commitment to, as an organization, as a board, as senior management, as staff, to really bringing this governance to life and making sure it's working as efficiently and effectively as it needs to. Progress since our last update really are two things. One is Kim and I have been working on gathering and reviewing governance-related information pertinent to the workshop. Many of you as board members have provided us direct feedback on all of the policies. We're gathering those, consolidating that, and creating a document that will help us navigate through that. Senior management is in the process of reviewing the policies as well. Eric Douglas is having phone conversations with directors, and that option is open to everybody, every director, really, and that's helping to shape and inform the workshop. And then we're also conducting a survey of OPPD's board and senior management, really centered on governance practices and how well are we doing. We have some data, I believe, from the last time we did it, and so we can see directionally, are we seeing improvements? Is the board, what level of agreement is there between the board and senior management? What do those gaps between thoughts around that mean, for example? So there'll be some really good data through that. Kim and I had a brief conversation with Eric yesterday, really in the spirit of us providing feedback in terms of what we're thinking about in terms of the workshop. And what's coming up from that really is three, I would say, broad components. One is we want to spend an amount of time really talking about this system and making sure that everyone is aligned and understanding and in agreement to the degree that we can ensure that that's there. We can move to the next step, which is really beginning, and I think the priority is centered in the strategic directives. And we'll focus with the strategic directives, and what we'd even like to do is understand, is there a pattern that emerges in terms of the board's priorities and strategic directives, and we'll just start where the priorities are. So Kim is going to be reaching out and making sure that we have an understanding of what those priorities are. Third, really, as we've just implemented this, I think what we find in the monitoring reports is that while we're able to understand the activity in terms of delivering results, there's not really been perhaps the time that's needed to have the discussion around the directive itself. And is the directive itself something that the board is aligned around, and is that still going to be the case? So part of the conversation will be, how do we want to have these conversations around the policies moving forward, so we're able to craft and make sure that we have the right kind of time dedicated to ensure that that's part of it as well. That's kind of how the agenda is emerging. That's kind of how we're thinking the workshop. We're still gathering information, so we may learn some things between now and the next reporting period around this as well. Our intention is to draft up an agenda based once we have enough of information to make this work and get it back out to you so we can see what it is. And then, of course, we'll get through as many policies as we can. and feedback suggests that we may have more policies to review than we will have time, which is something I believe that Director Moody had asked at one point in time. And I said, we'll get through as many as we can to optimize the value of that workshop. We may find that by creating a forum or more opportunities for discussion that we're able to kind of evolve that conversation over time as well. So that's what we're thinking. Now, in terms of stakeholder engagement, we want to make sure that we're announcing this during every committee meeting so that anyone who's listening knows that indeed we're having this workshop. And secondly, after this committee meeting, corporate communications, thank you, Kate, has worked to develop an OPPD listen. So on the front page of OPPD.com, where it's kind of scrolling and making pertinent announcements like we're having a board meeting, this will come up and it will direct people to OPPD listens, where they'll also see the governance policies and have an opportunity to provide feedback, which we will consolidate all feedback received up to July 23rd for the board review and consideration. And then finally, this is kind of the next steps that we showed last time, and what's in white is really where we're still focusing on between now and next board. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Comment, Scott. Kim sent out and Eric sent out the board survey. I don't know if everyone's filled it out, but it's very important. You take the 10 or 15 minutes to fill it out so he can guide us and we don't waste our time. So if you haven't done that, Kim could maybe this afternoon if you even get a little break. It takes about 10 minutes if you haven't, but if you could get that done. It was due actually yesterday, but I'm sure you'd still take it. And then on another issue, where is the engagement center on the campus at UNO?
Yes.
Or is that
It's
by the library?
It's right by the clock.
Where we had our meeting.
By the clock tower, where we had the meeting before.
Same building.
Parking right front.
Yep, park in front.
Perfect.
Yeah, you were there before, yes.
Yeah, I just wondered if they have the other one, whatever it's called.
Throw those tickets away now.
You're not allowed to.
Very good. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, man?
That is it until we go into exec.
All right, and we need to do that. We'll do that right now.
Would you want to do it now?
Yeah, I think we're.
I move the board go into closed session at this time, 12:11 p.m. to discuss the commercial terms of a proposed wind power purchase agreement and to receive an update regarding collective bargaining matters and labor contracts, enterprise risk management issues, and senior management compensation. With respect to the discussion concerning the wind power purchase agreement, a closed session is necessary because the commercial terms of the proposed contract are considered by the project developer to be proprietary information, which if released would give advantage to business competitors and serve no public service. With respect to union negotiations, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because of the discussion of confidential matters relating to collective bargaining and labor contracts and matters protected by the attorney-client privilege. With respect to enterprise risk management, the discussions involve matters that are confidential, protected by attorney-client privilege, and attorney work product doctrine, and which involve the discussion of security by district property and utility infrastructure information. With respect to senior management compensation, a closed session is necessary to prevent needless injury to the reputation of the individuals involved, and no senior manager has requested a public meeting.
All right.
Do we have a second?
Barrett. Gone. Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Gay.
Yes.
Curley. McGuire.
Yes.
Mines.
Yes.
Moody.
Yes.
Yoder.
Yep.
Motion carried.
Okay, the motion to go into closed session is passed. This closed session will be limited to the discussion concerning the commercial terms of the wind power purchase agreement and to receive an update regarding collective bargaining matters and labor contracts, enterprise risk management, and senior management compensation. No votes or board action will be taken during the closed session. Okay, a motion and a second is required to reconvene in open session.
Right. I move.
Motion by Yoder, seconded by McGuire.
Barrett.
Yes?
Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Gay?
Yes.
He actually
McGuire?
just finished his
Yes.
bachelor's degree.
Mines?
And
Moody?
Yes.
Yoder?
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, a motion coming out of closed session at 2:54 is carried. The closed session was limited to the discussion concerning the commercial terms of a proposed wind power purchase agreement, received an update regarding collective bargaining matters and labor contracts, enterprise risk management, and senior management compensation. No votes or board action were taken during the closed session.